Hi, I'm Len Saxe. I'm a professor at Brandeis University, and I direct a set of research centers on the Jewish people, the Cohen Center, the Steinhardt Institute, and I've been studying for the last almost 20 years Taglit, Birthright Israel, and also Jewish life on college campuses. I wanted to continue, by way of introduction, I wanted to answer a question that Gil put on the table for us earlier about the nature of criticism of Israel. I'm a social psychologist by birth, by training. One of the most famous social psychologists is the Israeli Nobel laureate Danny Kahneman. And Kahneman wrote this book, Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow. And a lot of it is about how we privilege our personal experience and how what's happened to us frames how we see the world, and basically how we're lousy perceivers and understanders of what goes on in the world. And I think about that. Gil talked about Peter Beinart and their other critics. As a colleague in Boston at Northeastern University, Dov Waxman. And one of the things about these two academics is that they came out of South African families. Their frame of reference is apartheid, and everything that they see is filtered by that lens. And I think one of the challenges for us is not only to talk with people like this and try to be rational in discourse with them, but it's also for those of us who are Zionists to get out of some of our own personal experiences. Those of us who grew up as Israel went from a nascent, struggling country to a country with a powerful economy, with an extraordinary culture, having revived the Hebrew language, and having created an education system that produces some of the leading scholars in the world. How do we change our own understanding of history to confront the new anti-Semitism, to confront the new anti-Semitism, which is often cloaked in anti-Israelism, at a time when we are no longer, and Israel is no longer, the poor schleppers, the struggling people, and we are successful and we are dominant. So as I talk about the situation on campus, I want to infuse, I sometimes say to audiences, I'm going to try to confuse you with some facts. I'm going to try to share some of the systematic data that we have about campuses to help you understand the current situation, because I think it requires responses that are different than the responses that we've traditionally had.
My name's Andrew Getraer. I'm the executive director of the Hillel at Rutgers University. I've been there for 18 years, and I've seen a lot of dramatic changes in how Israel is perceived on campus, how students perceive Israel on campus. Rutgers is the largest Jewish undergraduate campus in the country, with a population of about 6,400 Jewish undergraduates, and one of the most diverse campuses of the country, which makes for a very interesting conversation on campus and an interesting context for our Zionist students and our Zionist questioning students. Like they used to say about the hair club for men, I'm not just a spokesman, I'm a customer, because I've got three children who are in college now, and one who will be next year, and one 2 years after that. So it's become a very personal thing for me as well as a professional endeavor.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Yoni Nirenberg, and I'm representing the student activists on college campuses across the United States. I've been a student activist prior to my years in college. I've worked with organizations over the years like Stand With Us, APAC, Mizrahi. And at the same time, throughout the years, I've strengthened my skills as an Israel advocate. I started off when my brother was in the IDF as a lone soldier, starting to raise funds to get the winter gear. I think we know what I'm referring to. And now on college campus, we continue to pursue activities that are pro-Israel, pro-Jewish, pro-Judaism, trying to bring the word out in different forums. We've recently I'll get in detail later on. We recently passed an anti-BDS law on campus. We successfully completed over 30 events this past semester. But as much as I say these numbers, last Tuesday during the snow, we had a nice 12-foot sign in the snow that said Free Palestine. So as much as we're going to be talking about numbers, this still is something that happens on a regular basis across the United States. And I like to say it comes in waves, where we have our plus months and our negative months type of thing. And hopefully we're not drowning that often in the waves. Sorry, I go to Long Island University. Yeah.
Once again, I would really hope we're going to have an open dialogue here, but also hopefully we'll keep it positive to the extent we can. So my first question is this, and it feeds off Professor Troy's statement. Look, the majority of Jews who are college students are center to left, and he said 80%, and I think obviously it skews, in my experience, a little bit more left. So the question is, what do we have to do to engage the Jewish left to get excited about Zionism and Israel?
So the key problem is the lack of knowledge. That yes, 75%, 80% are liberal or moderate. They don't know much about Israel. They don't know much, in many cases, about their Jewish identities. And when you look at, first of all, while they are overwhelmingly liberal, they are overwhelmingly supportive of Israel. They're overwhelmingly connected, or so they tell us. They feel a tie to Israel. Who are the students who don't feel a tie to Israel? They're not the people who dislike Israel or don't feel a connection because they feel the government isn't the government that they would have elected. It's because they don't know anything. They don't know about Israel. And many of the people who are critics of Israel are actually some of the most knowledgeable people who, when you ask them about their connection, say they feel highly connected. And in some ways, they're not dissimilar. What? In other words, the people who say they don't have any connection to Israel are not the people who hate Israel because of its policies or who have bought into BDS. You can count on your fingers at most campuses the number of Jewish students who support BDS. It's because of a lack of knowledge. And this is where personal experience comes into play. I've been studying, as Gil described it, Birthright Israel now for close to 20 years. Some of the people we've followed since they went on the trip, or actually we followed many people who just applied to the trip or in the early years there weren't enough places, and so we can compare them to people who actually went on the trip who are similar to them. And what we find is you give people the experience of learning about their Judaism, their connection to Jews around the world, learn about Israel, and they are for life very different people. So for me, it is the Zionist challenge at the moment is chinuch. It's education. It's helping people learn about who they are as Jews and learn about Israel and feel in a personal way a connection.
Your question, the way you framed it, assumes that 80% of students being center left is a negative thing for Zionism. And I'm not in that 80% personally, but I don't think that that's the right way to think about this. 70-80% of college students who are left-wing or center in regards to Israel doesn't mean that they're anti-Israel, anti-Zionist at all. I think as Len is spot on. They do feel a very strong connection to Israel. The question is one of education, but the question is also one of what are our goals as a Jewish community in engaging them. And I think for the most part, we haven't clarified our goal with college students. A number of years ago at Rutgers, we've had, as you mentioned, waves of anti-Israel activity. And a number of years ago, this is back to 2010, 11, 12, things were very bad on our campus. And in response, we decided we had to create something that was proactive and permanent. So we created what we call the Rutgers Hillel Center for Israel Engagement. It was done originally in partnership with the Jewish Federations of New Jersey, and has now been going strong for the last 7 or 8 years. And in creating that, we had to decide what actually is our goal. When you're working with college students with Israel, what is your goal? And what are the values that animate that? And we came up with this idea that we are driven by a core belief that a positive relationship to Israel is essential for a healthy Jewish identity. It's not about where you are in the political spectrum. It's not about like what party you would vote for or how much you hate Bibi, which, by the way, college students hate Bibi.
My son's in college. And I don't
My sons are in college too, and I'm going to tell you, 80% of students think Bibi is a terrible human being. I happen to be like the only Lakudnik in New Brunswick, so I'm not here to criticize Bibi. I'm here to tell you that students, they don't see past that aspect of political Zionism, but we want to see past that aspect of Zionism. We want students to have a positive relationship to the state of Israel, because if they don't, they're not going to be healthy as Jews. People can't be healthy if they don't have a good relationship with their family. You can go through life like hating your parents or your brother or your sister, but it's going to be pain for you for the rest of your life. If you're a Jew and you can't find that positive relationship to your brothers and sisters in Israel and the state of Israel, there's going to be a part of you that's in pain, even if you're not aware of it or you've rationalized it away. You're not fully healthy. So we want our students to find that positive relationship however they can. And for some of them, it's going to be political, the way that we commonly talk about Israel. Left, right, 2-state, 1-state. But that's not the totality of the relationship you can have to Israel. So what we need to do is work almost on an individual basis with students to show them that there are aspects of Israel, aspects of Israelis that you can feel great about, that actually speak to your personal experience. And that is being a Zionist too. And when they feel that personal relationship, or they feel that, oh, I don't have to support this government or this policy or whatever it is that puts us in a narrow box, then you can start to have a real relationship. And then you can start to have a community. And that's been our goal.
I think the best way that we built a community on campus, I would say, is that having that open door policy, regardless of wherever you want to define yourself on the spectrum, that's where we found to be the best way to increase our population and our community building. Because look, you'll have people that say you can go on the Birthright experience, you'll have a great time and you'll grow in Zionism. But then you do have movements that say, there is the occupation, if you want to call that, whatever term you want to use, Judea and Samaria, and that whole side of the spectrum. Or even with politics. You don't need to get politics involved to have a connection to Israel. You can have a connection to Israel religiously, politically, historically, whatever you want to call it. Just like downstairs, we have Zionism, people from the different sides of the spectrum. And it's okay. We can all be under the same roof, and we can all be under the umbrella of Zionism. So the best form that we instituted at Long Island University is to have that open dialogue policy, to be open with each other, to have that respected, that we could have different opinions, but at the same time work together for a common goal, which in our case would be a community as one. That's why for us, we do have 4 different clubs on campus, but we all share 2 rooms. And there's a purpose behind that, so that it's not just me versus you club, but it's an us versus them situation. Sometimes that we do need that, unfortunately. But at the same time, you'll have people from the different spectrums going to each other's events. And that's what we wanted on our campus. So
both Andrew and Yoni, mentioned openness. And one of the things that I'm very much aware of is the Open Hillel movement. And my question to you is, how is the Open Hillel movement affecting both Zionism and Israel programs and the outlook of Jewish students on what it means to be Jewish, what it means to be, to support Israel, what it means to be Zionist on campus.
The Open Hillel movement, does everybody here know what that refers to? Okay, so the Open Hillel movement, a number of years ago on Swarthmore's campus, students wanted to have a Hillel that was open to dialogue with groups or have speakers that were anti-Zionist, and that they want that openness. And Hillel has certain national guidelines, thank you, about Israel, where we do not partner with organizations or individuals who don't accept the right of Israel to exist as a democratic and Jewish state. And so that Open Hillel movement became kind of a way for students on particular campuses to subvert Hillel, delegitimize Hillel's approach to Israel. And it has spread very, very poorly. It's not a significant movement. And it's a concern for lots of the kinds of folks that are in this room, right? Because we're very sensitive to anything that's going on with Israel on campus and concerned, and we want to know what the impact is. But the fact is that the impact of Open Hillel has been almost completely negligible. It is active, if you can call it that, on, 7 campuses in the country. Swarthmore itself has, how many Jews are at Swarthmore? Not many. Right, they haven't had a meeting this big in the history of Swarthmore Hillel. I take that back, but there were only there were less than 10 students who created Open Hillel, and it's not like that is a large movement. We sometimes give more credence to, if not now, JVP, Open Hillel, to anti-Zionist groups, if you want to call them that come out of the Jewish community, than I think is merited by the numbers and by the impact that they're having. Doesn't mean we shouldn't be concerned. Doesn't mean we shouldn't educate ourselves about them and think of strategies to work or deal with them. But we also have to remind ourselves that they are not taking over the campuses. What takes over the campuses much, much more than Open Hillel or any of these groups is complete apathy. That's the real danger.
As a student, we have something new every day on campus. We didn't know that there was going to be the Free Palestine on the snow last Tuesday, but that's something that we just came up to. So as an Israel advocate, we have to change on a regular basis what our narrative and our engagement will be on campus. Specifically on my campus, we don't deal with an Open Hillel situation. We deal with more with the Muslim Students Association. But talking about apathy, that is something that we deal with on a regular basis. We try to tackle it threefold, depending on the day of the week. Like Monday, we'll have an activity that's more open dialogue, for like bagels we call it, versus a Tuesday and Wednesday, which is more of a lecture based, depending, one from the religious side and one from the Zionism side. And that's how we try to tackle apathy, depending on what our students need at the time.
And I'll tell you a little a research anecdote. Several years ago, we developed a test of Israel knowledge. And one of my minor obsessions is with maps. And so we had a set of questions that had maps that had, instead of the names of places, dots. And people taking the test had to figure out where were they. And one of the interesting things we found in a group, this was actually Birthright applicants, but they're representative of all of the Jewish students on campus, is that 50% of them labeled Tel Aviv as the West Bank. It was a multiple choice question. Now, if you're smart and you look at a map, but you don't know the map of Israel, why not? It's on the West Coast. Why isn't this the West Bank? If a student doesn't know that, and by the way, we did this at select schools, not so select schools. It wasn't like we went to particular schools where there wasn't a lot of knowledge of the world. If you don't know where the West Bank is, how do you understand what's written in the newspaper every day about a two-state solution, about the Shtachim, about what? How do you understand that? So my sense is, yes, helping advocates advocate is important. But more important for the Jewish community is making sure that our children, that Jewish students, understand something about their history, understand something about modern Israel. Because if you don't have that, you don't have anything. I am the first person to say that some of the things that have gone on campus and some of the organizations, some of the Muslim student organizations like JVP, if not now, have been and say both destructive and horrible and inaccurate things. On the one hand. On the other hand, we need to have a dialogue with them. And we have to be very careful not to simply hand them a megaphone. That in fact, what they do is intended to draw the rest of us in to their discussion and their framing of the problem rather than our framing of the problem. And I go back to the comment I made a few minutes ago. Those who are the least connected are the least knowledgeable. And that should tell us a lot about what we need to do. I'll say one other thing about the data about campuses. What's interesting is that, yes, the 75, 80% who are liberal or moderate, certainly not conservative, who would be in Israeli terms center left, that represents American Jewish college students, are highly supportive of Israel, feel attached to Israel. At the same time, they do get flack from their non-Jewish peers, that non-Jews, young non-Jews, are not as supportive of Israel. They're not against Israel. Many of them know even less than Jewish students do, but it does create an issue for Jewish students on campus.
We heard today also by Professor Troy that 70% of Jews are intermarrying these days. So the question is, how do we engage Jewish families from interfaith households in Israel programs, particularly when the Israeli government will not recognize a lot of them as Jews?
I think the first way to do it is, look, there's twofold. One is that I don't think if someone's coming from an intermarried household, right, I don't think engaging them with Zionism you have to bring up the government in general. Zionism in general, in the broadest terms, does not have to bring up politics. And in that specific case, I wouldn't bring up politics until it has to be brought up. Now, that doesn't mean that a Jew cannot identify themselves with Zionism just because the government might not recognize them as a Jew. You have plenty of Zionists on a college campus that are not Jewish, of the Jewish faith, but still identify as a Zionist. We have Christian Zionists. We have Muslim Zionists, as small as that, as crazy as that sounds. But you don't have to be a Jew to the definition of an Israeli government to be a Zionist.
But the law of return accepts them as Jews. So why
Okay,
are you saying that?
whatever. That's not.
You're doing it on purpose.
We're
Okay.
going to have a chance to discuss this. It will be a lot easier.
Okay, but we're not discussing it.
Hold it. His answer was excellent.
Right.
That's my answer. Thank you. I think specifically for that specific student, right, coming from a household that is getting two different opinions, right. I think for him specifically, I would bring up Zionism in its term and the connection that he can have, because he's coming with a different identity. He's coming from the religious of whatever Jewish identity he has and the other parent. And that could be a connection and a bond that he's going to have differently from other people. And you can bring in, if he's coming from if the other side is Christian, you can bring in the Christian Zionism faith. If he's African-American descent, you can bring that type of Zionism in. There's different ways of connecting him to Zionism. And I wouldn't connect him to Zionism just because he comes from that identity. That's me.
Well said. And I would agree, and I want to go a little further. There are a lot of challenges to the Jewish community when you've got 70% of non-Orthodox Jews intermarrying. Israel and Zionism is not necessarily, sometimes it is a problem in that cohort, but it's not necessarily a problem in that cohort. Many of the most staunch Zionist student leaders that I have experienced at Rutgers come from a one Jewish parent household. Because in America, Jewish tends to lean towards religious. there's not that many institutions that my students grow up with in the Jewish community that they can even identify other than a synagogue. And for a student who's growing up in a family that's not synagogue-oriented, what Jewish institution or identity can they latch onto? And those who feel Jewish or who are being raised Jewish, the state of Israel is very often the thing that they can feel attached to, because the state of Israel is a secular state, because the state of Israel contains the broad civilization of the Jewish people to which they can find a connection, and they don't need to be religious to do that. The issues that you're alluding to, where it's not that the government doesn't recognize they're Jewish, but around the kotel and the rabbinate being only Orthodox, etc., most of those students are not aware of those issues at all because they don't affect their lives. They haven't been a part of their lives. When they discover it, they can be hurt and they can need to discuss or wrestle with those issues, but those aren't the issues they're bringing to the table necessarily.
So I agree with both of these comments, and I want to add another one, which basically the premise of your question is inaccurate. That the government of Israel, for example, which supports Birthright Israel, welcomes children of intermarried parents. 40% of the participants of the close to 35,000 from North America last year came from one Jewish parent households, and they accept the participants' declaration that they're Jewish and that they have a Jewish parent. Furthermore, it is those children of intermarried parents with whom we see the greatest impact, both in the short term and the long term. We call it the delta. The delta is greatest for them, even though they do start out at a lower level. There's one other fact which has to be understood, and this is where our personal experience, and looking at the ages of folks in the room, I bet many of you will be surprised at this. Until 1980, if you were the Jewish child born of intermarried parents, it was very unlikely that you would identify as Jewish when you became 18, when you became an adult. For the generation born after 1980, the first generation was the millennial generation, the number went from about 30% of previous generations, so less than 1 out of 3, to over 60%. 100% increase. And so one of the reasons right now that this is an issue, one of the reasons that Birthright is taking so many children of intermarried parents, is the success of American Judaism to welcome and engage these people. Now, one final comment is that a number of years ago, those of you who travel back and forth all the time to Israel know this, they stopped giving you the boule. They stopped when you got to Ben Gurion. Instead of putting a stamp in your passport, you got this little thing with your picture on it. One of the things we learned from hundreds and hundreds of interviews with the children of intermarried parents is when they got to passport control and they got that stamp in their passport, they felt legitimated. They felt as if, the great Bet Din had made the determination that they were really part of the Jewish people. And then Birthright works very hard to not discriminate. In other words, to make people all feel part of a group. So yes, the intermarriage rate, assimilation is a problem. But in fact, Israel, and through Birthright in particular, but other things, has been really important. And I absolutely agree that students don't know about, they don't know where Tel Aviv is, but they also don't know about the issues with the kotel and some of the other issues that for those of us who are leaders in the Jewish community concern us all the time.
Is Birthright undercutting Zionism by not allowing Jewish students to meet with Arab students, and therefore denying them the opportunity to get a full perspective of what Israeli life is like?
So again, the premise of the question is totally wrong.
You have to see where it's coming from.
And The issue, the Birthright, from its inception, has had encounters between Arabim, Arab citizens of Israel, Palestinians, and Birthright groups. 2 years ago, there was a systematic curriculum developed. There was a whole committee and group that put this together. And what they've been trying to figure out is how to make these encounters the most productive. What they haven't done, and by the way, the origin of this was not any. What was, first of all, the goals of Birthright are not political goals. They're goals about Jewish identity. But the origins of not traveling to the shtachim, to the territories, was about security issues. Remember, Birthright started during the Intifada. Many people didn't want it, thought it was too dangerous for young Americans to go. And so, for the most part, they don't do that. But were they to do, and now they do go to some places over the green line. Again, there is no policy that prohibits this contact. The issue is how to do this and how to do it properly. Do you bring them to settlements? Do you bring them? How do you expose them to diverse perspectives? And all I can tell you is that they are working very, very hard to figure this out. Gil is actually the chair of the education committee, and there are some really wonderful people who work on that along with the educators in Birthright. But on a 10-day trip that is focused on creating Jewish groups and teaching about Jewish identity, figuring out how to balance that with encounters with Palestinians, particularly those who live over the Green Line, those who don't support the existence of the State of Israel. It is a problem, and it's a really difficult educational problem.
If the question is, should Birthright be introducing students to Palestinian perspectives and dealing with the conflict on the Birthright trip, I would say absolutely not. That's not what the Birthright trip is designed to do. The Birthright trip it's an introduction to Jewish heritage. And you have a student who, not only they don't know where Tel Aviv is, they don't know that there's not a temple in Jerusalem, if they knew there ever was a temple in Jerusalem, right? Or two, right? They don't, when they just see a pine tree in the Galilee, it blows their mind that they're not in the desert. We're talking about a trip which is designed to do the basic foundational work of introducing young Jews to their history and to their brothers and sisters who now live in our homeland. To go to the most complicated, controversial, difficult issue in Israel, in almost in world politics, and that this isn't the trip for that. We do a trip for that separately for our students. That includes a number of non-Jewish students also, because there is a place for it. But Birthright is not it.
It's Zionism. You don't have to teach them everything out there. There are books that are like 500 pages, that's dense, bookend situations that can go into detail, and you can go into the resolutions and the years and the occupations and whatever terms you want to use. But I don't think that's what a student needs on his first engagement to a country that's 6,000 miles away and a situation that will at some point identify him in the future.
The question is, for campuses, when many of us are reform and conservative and are trying to pray, and that lack of religious pluralism is not recognized by the State of Israel, and the plans has been jeopardized, how does that affect us when we're trying to promote Israel programs and Zionism, saying it's so pluralistic?
Most of our students are not aware of these issues. We discussed that already. They're not aware of any of this. It's well beyond the level of Israel knowledge and discourse that they have. But it does make it more difficult, because when they do know these things, when their fellow student who is more knowledgeable, when an anti-Israel student who may use this against them brings it to them, it creates dissonance, as it should, because it is a troubling issue. But Zionism isn't based on whether or not the state of Israel, the institutions of Israel, are making the best decisions or the right decisions at all times for everybody, because it never has. And from the very beginning, there have been conflicting forms of Zionism, conflicting beliefs about what the state should be doing, politically, religiously, culturally, you name it. This is just part of the growing pains of a state which is younger than, my grandmother. So if you frame it in that context, then you can help students to be part of the wrestling with it, which is what we want them to have. We want them to have a relationship with Israel that's live and meaningful. And if they're wrestling with the same issues Israelis are wrestling with, they're not antagonistic towards Israel. They're a part of the Zionist enterprise.
So I think the issue is twofold, because the problem is we're looking at it from the American perspective. There is the Israeli perspective of saying that I'm an Israeli, this is my country, and this is my domestic policy. Why you as an outside source are imposing your policy onto me? So that's one perspective that we got to understand. And the other perspective would be is that as an American Jew, first of all, as a professional, because there are professionals in the room, if you're going to have students on your campus that will identify in the progressive movement or left, whatever you want to use the terms, make sure you know how to respond to it. It shouldn't be my responsibility to defend it, even though I like to say I'm an activist and I come from different sides of the spectrum. But as a professional, please have the answers for it. But I think from a student for students perspective and conversations, I think that's not the first conversation we'll have. And if it will be a conversation to be had, I think that's where education comes in, where your student activist on the campuses knows the history, knows why it's a complex issue. And if at the end of the conversation, the student is more complex and he understands that there are two perspectives, I think that's a gain, because this isn't an issue that's easy. And this is still an issue that people talk about in the Knesset on a regular basis. I'm not going to sit here and give you an answer about how to deal with this issue when even the parliament of the country that has the issue, that plays the political side of it, doesn't know the answer to it either.
Do students on your campuses see Israel as relevant to their lives? If no, why? And if yes, how?
So I'll start with, first, no, because I would blame the education system that they grew up in for not placing Israel as part of their lives in the modern day Zionism and as a Jew. But for those that do identify with Israel, I would say that once they identify themselves with the movement of Zionism or with Judaism as a whole, I think at that point it's on a conversational basis to see where the student wants to grow. There are students that want to grow more in religious affairs and not with Israel, and that's a conversation that could be had. But if it's a student that wants to grow in Zionism or in Israel-related affairs, then that's another identity that we can merge with.
And Len he has the numbers to tell you, but my anecdotal experience, the majority of Jewish students feel some connection to Israel. That doesn't mean it's relevant to their lives. Right, most of them, it's not relevant to their daily lives. For a percentage, a smaller percentage, 10 or 20%, maybe, it's something that is a part of their identity or their activist life as a student. For the rest, it's something that they might think about once in a while or plug into, but it's not part of their daily life in any significant way.
We have a lot of children of Israelis on campus these days. And I would like to ask you to address, how do we deal with Zionism with these children of Israelis?
I think the simplest answer to give, because we're short on time, would be make sure that they're part of the conversation. They bring a perspective that is different to our side of the world. They bring a perspective where the families, if the student themselves didn't go through the Intifada because of the age difference, but if the student went through the Intifada, that's a conversation and perspective that they can bring to the table. Or if they grew up in a household where, let's say, they had to be disengaged from Gaza or they were part of a suicide attack, whatever you want to call it, whatever situation, each Israeli has a conversation and a connection to Israel that's different than someone that grew up in the diaspora. And I think allowing them to be part of the conversation can only benefit you in the long run.
We have at a lot of campuses in America now, certainly at Rutgers, we have a group called Mishelanu. It's part of the Israel-American Council, so that Israeli students and Israeli-American students can gather together, because they often don't really feel that the reference points of the American Jewish community are relevant to them at all. So they don't necessarily take an active role in traditional American Jewish student activities. But when they have their own, then they can speak Hebrew, and that sometimes becomes an outlet for them. They have a really important role to play, because when it's easy for people to demonize people who they don't see or know. But when a student has to confront another student who they are kind of trained to respect each other and respect diversity, who is from Israel, it changes that conversation. It's not an abstract person. It's not an abstract thing that you can hate anymore. It's this person who's like you as your peer. And that has a calming effect on the conversation in many regards.
And I'll just second my two colleagues.
Okay. Now I'm going to take some questions.
First of all, you are from Brandeis. Yeah? Are you a professor in Brandeis?
I am.
How do you feel about that they dishonor Ayan Hirsi Ali?
I'm a professor at Brandeis, and years ago, many years ago now, an honorary degree was announced to Ayan Hirsi Ali, a very prominent and courageous Muslim activist, and the president on his own made a decision to withdraw it. It was done without any consultation with the faculty, and when it happened, all I could do is lobby people on the Board of Trustees and others about what damage was going to be done to the university. I think, and this is, I'll make this a general issue about all of the things that go on a campus. You can't take a single incident and say this defines the campus, because Brandeis University is also the place that has more courses on Israel, trains. It's trained now 300 faculty around the world to teach Israel studies, is the home of the research program on Birthright Israel. We do so many things. The person who made this decision is no longer at Brandeis. None of the people involved in the decision are any longer at Brandeis. And I think we have to look positively. And again, given my focus on chinuch, on education, on engaging people, what we are doing now, what we have been doing, and we were doing in parallel with this decision that I agree was the wrong decision, is actually far more important.
So hi, I'm Barak. I'm Shaliach for Habonim Drone North America. President Rubi Rivlin said that the fact that Jews and Arabs live in Israel is not a goral, not a fate, but it's a destiny. It's a ye'ud. From what I'm feeling, from what different things that you said, it seems that the difficult issues of Israel's society are sort of being bypassed, and or coming from a place that a lot of students don't know about these issues. And actually, I'm telling someone who came from Israel, I meet a lot of students who are telling me things about Khan al-Ahmar and things that they see here that maybe people in Israel sometimes are not sensitive. I want to ask you, why aren't the difficult issues in Israel seen as an opportunity for engagement and not seen as an obstacle?
They are an opportunity for engagement, but there's a very small percentage of the students for whom that's an engaging opportunity. We just ran a weekly difficult questions group where we sit around and people talk about this stuff, but the number of students who have that knowledge and passion they're really a minority.
I would say if it's brought up in a conversation, to continue the conversation, have that coffee date as what we use on campus. But unfortunately, the numbers on our campus does not need that at this moment. But that doesn't mean another campus that might need it, I would say that they should bring it up in the conversation. I wouldn't throw it to the side just because it's something that's happening 6,000 miles away. Okay?
So absolutely, these issues are an opportunity for conversation. What I would like to see is them made academic issues. So at Brandeis, to use my campus as an example, we have courses in Israeli and Palestinian art. We have courses in the sociology of Israel, in the politics of the political system of Israel, that in the context of talking about in an academic way, with reading multiple perspectives, there is an opportunity to talk about these issues. I agree with Andrew that in most cases, the lectures, the prominent speakers, the demonstrations, they tend to have a narrow perspective, and many of the people in the audience for these kinds of educational interactions don't have sufficient context to appreciate them.
So I'm on the board of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East, and the one thing that I've noticed has been missing from this conversation is any discussion of faculty and the influence that faculty has on students. I think that Simone Zimmerman is probably a really good example when you talk about personal experience. She grew up in an Orthodox home, and yet she got to was Berkeley or Stanford or one of the UC schools, and now she's with B'Tselem after working for Bernie Sanders. So, how Ken Stein is a dear friend. How many Dr. Saxes and Ken Steins, Ken's about to retire, and Emory's probably going to be done with having that wonderful program. How many of you are there, and what do we do about faculty that are influencing both Jewish and non-Jewish students in a way that is funded by Qatar and the Saudis and very damaging to our people?
So I can say my good friend and colleague Ilan Troen, an American who made Aliyah many years ago to Ben Gurion and then came back after early retirement and founded the Schusterman Center here and was the progenitor of this program to engage hundreds now. It's been almost 12 years, hundreds of academics. He has been in the forefront, and he's just one of the people in creating a field of Israel studies where there are people who are at the top of their disciplines, history, sociology, politics, psychology, art, whatever, who are engaged in teaching academically courses with academic integrity about Israel. So I think there is a next generation, and it's interesting. I was just making arrangements to attend this year's Association of Israel Studies, which is the first time is meeting in the Galil this coming year, and this is an organization that years ago had a political bias. And today it doesn't. And today the perspectives that are offered are people who not only recognize the importance of the existence of the State of Israel and its right to exist, but are also top academics. So I think there has been a sea change. It's one of the things that's tough is to understand the changes that have happened, given the megaphone that is available to those who've been critical, and from my perspective, in many cases, have not operated with academic integrity.
So if the question is about the role of faculty in anti-Zionism, I think that the role of faculty in promoting anti-Zionist ideas dwarfs everything that any other organization you've ever heard of does. It dwarfs Students for Justice in Palestine. It dwarfs, if not now, or everything. And it is one of the most difficult aspects of this entire conflict to change, because although change does happen within academia, it's almost like on a generational basis. It's not a coincidence that the intersectionality with which the American Jewish community is feeling threatened by on a political level comes out of the university. And those ideas pervade certain aspects of the university. And while it may not be the majority of faculty, those who are staunchly opposed to the State of Israel and are willing to call it all of the lies and names that we know, they have a megaphone, and they have a lifetime job, and they have influence over generations of students. It is one of the most challenging aspects of this entire question.
Yes, there are faculty who are who've done and say and write things that are inaccurate and are anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist and anti-Israel. At the same time, when you talk to students, the principal voices that they hear that are anti-Israel are not faculty voices. And I'm not sure that faculty are all that influential. And I actually know of some of these people who, their personal views notwithstanding, because they're good academics, they're still able to teach without that bias coming through. But it is, but yes, faculty are an issue. Years ago, I proposed a Birthright Israel for faculty because part of it is engaging faculty, having them learn.
As a student that has to deal with professors that have tenure and will say what they want, regardless of other people's opinions, I would say that if it's an organization that wants to, if it's a student that wants to, that thinks that the professor is having issues that don't align with and might be factually incorrect, I would suggest that the student records it, because that's the first thing that a student would need in a conversation down the line to prove what the situation was. I would say if there is an organization that wants to deal with the professors out there, I would say, yes, you can take them on a Birthright to Israel. Or you can do a seminar on campus, letting them be the students for once, letting them see the conversations and having the seminars and having the conversations with them. But there are students out there that are intimidated on a regular basis. University of Michigan, a student wanted a letter of recommendation, couldn't get it because it's Israel. UCLA, there's professors. Yeah, there are professors too. You know, there's a list where a letter of recommendation, a activity on campus that can't be done, professors cannot come in, and there are students that feel very low on the totem pole. And I think if there are organizations out there that want to tackle this issue, you either tackle it from the professor side, you know, education, meetings, trips, whatever you want to use, but also from the student side to let the students feel empowered to want to speak out and want to take the recordings, knowing that at the end of the day, their grades might be reprimanded for.
We have to end. Thank you very much. I want to thank all of you. I want to thank our panelists for their great answers.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.